Welcome to another chapter of our Planning for Your Marketplace webinar. Today we'll be going over features and functionality. Let's get to it.
So the next one is features. So a couple of the features before you dive in and talk about those. Obviously, we've got ones like comparison engine, right? If I'm going out looking for a specific product in a marketplace, theoretically, I could go look for that product and I could see that product available across multiple vendors, and I could compare price, or I could compare lead time, or I could compare, maybe they have a different warranty for the same thing, right? So comparison is a big one. Being able to filter out and see more things from the seller, being able to communicate with the seller, ask them questions about the product. But I also want you to dive in a little more, like some of the ones we did on the pool one, where we had hard and soft stops. We had the ability to go in and manually do quotes, right? Where people could go in and say, hey, Mr. Vendor, are there any vendors out there that if I buy 100 units of these and I'm willing to pay $100, where we did some of that automated, they can put a threshold to say, we'll accept up to this price, and it'll auto accept that, or it won't because it's outside the threshold, and it auto sends. So there's some really complex things that obviously I did not explain well. But if you can dive into some of those, I think the core features most people know. I mean, I think we've all shopped on Amazon. I think, they're the king of marketplaces, or Alibaba, right? Everybody's been there. Everybody's shopped on there. So we all know the basic functionality of seeing the sellers and comparing the products and seeing related products and all the basic core features. So on your checklist, make sure to write down the basic stuff that you want to make sure, right? So when you go shopping for your platform, you can get a demo of those core features. The most important thing, though, is the platform scalable and customizable for the additional core functionality that your business needs? And that's really what I want Chris to dive into now, right? Some of that hard stuff like hard and soft stops and manual quoting and auto threshold acceptance of bidding, and just some stuff that we've seen that were unique to our clients, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I mean, I think it's really probably the most important thing to take away from this checklist when you're looking at software is, can it adapt to my scenario? Because one of the things that led us to create the software that we created was literally for 7 or 8 years, we worked with off-the-shelf tools exclusively. And what we found in that process was that the last mile, the last 5 to 10% of functionality tended to be such that we were literally painted into a corner because we had completed 95% with this quote unquote off the shelf functionality. But the business, in order to fully realize its objectives of self-service and low friction for the users, it really had to have these 3 capabilities. That's where the bottleneck was. And frankly, Ron, this has been sort of an accumulation over those 7 to 8 years. And then 10 years after that of validating it for the entire 10 years that this is really the bottom line. You need a set of core features, and you really do want to understand what are those core features. And there should be a reasonable set of core capabilities within whatever marketplace platform you choose. But probably most importantly, and this depends on your business. If your business is mature enough that, or it's complex enough, that you need certain things, and that they're bottlenecks, or you are projecting that they reasonably will be. Does the platform you're working with really have a set of architecture that is friendly toward that? And what do I mean? Well, let's just take an example. Let's look at the example of Legos versus maybe clay. Clay is great. You can make whatever you want. But once you bake it, it's kind of set. And I'm not a clay expert, but I don't really think a lot of people add more clay after the fact. But with Legos, you can add and remove as you need. And ultimately, the point is, like, once a platform is sort of set in stone, if it's not well made, it's going to be like clay that's been baked. It looks really good. It's really cool. It can be used for that specific purpose, but really not a lot else. And it's sort of brittle. And like, if you crack it, it's gone. Whereas with Legos, they're really made to be, interchanged. And with software, that is very much the case, that depending on how the software was architected and written, it can either do really well with a specific set of tasks, or it can do really well with a specific set of tasks and be adaptive to new tasks. And if you think about it, what is the basis for the platform? Was it made to be adaptive, and was it made to be compatible with changes and adaptations that you're going to have? And without going into super detail on the technical front, I will just say that some keywords that you should look for are things like plugins or modules, the ability to override or extend, and then look for examples of that. Look for specific examples where mechanically you can see that, okay, all of these different areas of this marketplace platform were overridden, and I can see actual examples of that, and it's a viable solution. And one of the key questions that I would always ask around that is, what are the limitations? What are the areas that can't be extended or overridden, and why? And so if you get those answers, you can sort of understand, what the limitations actually are. The answer should be effectively, there are no limitations, but there may be, more overhead to overriding or extending a core feature. And you need to know what that is ideally.
Yeah. My big litmus test is the API, right? As I'm doing demos, I have a lot of people come in and ask us about our marketplace, and we start talking through that, and they're like, well, how does it stack up to this, right? And I'll say, well, have you looked at the documentation for the API for that platform? And they're like, no. And we'll Google it, we'll open it up, and we'll walk through the API together. And I'll show them that most APIs out there have anywhere from about 200 to 500 endpoints, right? And they're like, see, look at all the stuff it has there. It's all documented. It can do everything. And I said, yeah, watch this. And I pop into our platform. I go to the API documentation, and we have over 11,000 endpoints documented within the platform. So when you start taking 500 endpoints and 500 functions that you can do within a platform to 11,000, they don't even compare, right? I mean, our platform was literally made to be infinitely scalable and was designed that way first. And so when I see all these platforms and these people come in and ask me to evaluate their platforms and say, this is really scalable and customizable, and I'm like, oh, what do you need it to do? This and this and this. Well, then why are you coming to me? Because it doesn't do that. Well, then it's not infinitely scalable. So that's really, for me, the litmus test is I go look at the API. So once I write all my features down, can I go in and integrate all those features? For example, and I'm not picking on WooCommerce, it's the most widely distributed e-commerce plugin in the world, but WooCommerce has about anywhere from 200 to 400 endpoints, depending on which documentation you're looking at, right? But it doesn't do invoicing at all. So when you go to B2B and we try to go integrate that with, I've got clients that have WooCommerce on the front end, but then they come to us to integrate, Dynamics AX on the back end, which those two just don't even sync. But now all of a sudden they've got all this invoicing and all this multi-warehouse. They've got all this capability in their ERP that can't be exposed in WooCommerce, because even if there's a plugin that adds invoicing to WooCommerce, which there is, those plugins don't extend the API. So now we don't have the ability unless we directly integrate directly to the database, which everyone knows is not the way to integrate, right? So this is the most important reason for me why you get these features written down, so that then you can go validate the true capability to extend and support that functionality in the future, which that leads us right into our next bullet point, which is my favorite thing I hear you say all the time.
Thanks for watching an episode of our Marketplace Webinar Chapter Series. Join Chris and Ron in our next video, where they will cover your 3 to 5 year plan. See you there.